My head ached as I awoke from my unwilling slumber. I rested on the car's shattered dashboard with a dying fire blazing just a few feet away. I coughed from the fumes, dazed but otherwise unharmed. Once I could gather enough air in my lungs, I attempted to push myself up, checking my surroundings for clues as to what had happened. Only then did I realize that my car was lying in a ditch, partially wrapped around a tree. My last intact memory was my departure from work. I checked myself for injuries, trying to decide whether or not I should call an ambulance, but apart from a throbbing pain within my head, I felt more or less fine. I peered out the window looking around for another involved party, but I appeared to be the only victim of the crash. How long had I been out? Brilliant sunshine glistened through the shards of broken glass. It was a sunset that I would have appreciated any other day of the week, but on that day its presence alone unnerved me. It lit up the insides of my broken car, including my broken phone on the seat next to me. Even had I wanted to, calling for help was not an option. "Help!" I let out a pathetic whimper, my voice hoarse from the smoke inhalation. But it was no use. The road that I had crashed on was abandoned, lying miles away from civilization. It wasn't a path that I traveled often, but due to ongoing construction taking place on the main roads, it remained as my only intact route home from work. I had been in a rush, I remembered that much, but for what reason remained a mystery. I only had a faint memory of speeding down the road towards an intersection, followed by little more than a blank void in my mind. By the minute, the sun grew closer to the mountain range in the distance, consumed as the horizon ate it bite for bite. It was an uneasy reminder of something terrible to come, something that my fractured mind was unable to bring forth to attention. And that's when it hit me. The reason why I had been in such a rush toward the center of town. I hadn't been on my way home that evening. Instead, I had been heading for one of our town's designated raid shelters. It was the 25th of December, a date dreaded by each and every inhabitant of our godforsaken town. With that realization, a surge of adrenaline put my body to purpose. I pushed the car door open, crawling out onto the ground. I prayed for another vehicle to pass by, knowing that it was a futile pipe dream. By now, I knew the raid shelters were ready to close, which meant that anybody half intelligent would have gotten their asses off the streets. I was alone, and I would remain so until the raid finally arrived. For that was the curse of Silverwoods, that during the night of Christmas, something horrible emerged from the depths of the earth. The creatures, the predators, would emerge into the darkness of the night, seeking out each and every unfortunate soul still outside. Our only refuge were emergency raid shelters spread across town, and a few bunkers constructed by the rich and wealthy for their own protection. Alas, the closest shelter was several miles down the road, a sanctuary that I would never reach in time. Still dazed by the crash, I started rushing along the empty road. My only solace was a small gas station about a mile's walk down the road. Though it wouldn't stand a chance at keeping the predators out, it might serve as a decent hiding place as I awaited the break of dawn. With a quick estimate, I guessed that I had 15 minutes before the last rays of sunlight vanished below the horizon. A fit man might have easily made it to the gas station by then, but in my current condition, I knew that I didn't stand a chance. Despite that fact, I kept limping my way down the road, practically betting on a miracle to happen. All the while, the memories of years past haunted me, knowing exactly what would happen if the predators would find me. Long shadows were cast by the trees along the road, obscuring the mysteries of the forest. Though no one had been able to confirm it, some believed it to be the creature's origin. Thus it was a place avoided by most, not even visited on sun-filled summer days. Strange whispers started to emerge from the tree line, marking the beginning of the raid. The sounds resembled human chatter, speaking in incomprehensible words, mimicking familiar voices but filled with eerie yelps and broken groans. I tried to shut them out, a task that would become excruciatingly easy as another sound penetrated the air, pummeling the rest of the world into silence. It was an old tornado siren, one programmed to mark the last 5 minutes of daylight. It rang with an overwhelming sense of impending doom, giving people one last warning to get to the nearest shelter. But reaching safety was not an option, so I had to settle for the next best option. I was about 2/3 of the way to the gas station when I felt the pain in my head intensify, and with it I started to feel dizzy, causing me to stumble and fall to the ground. Yet I had not given up, so I tried to crawl, anything to escape the clutches of the predators. I stared up into the sky just in time to witness the last bit of daylight vanish in the distance. With that, the siren finally stopped its foreboding song. The raid had begun and I was trapped outside. A blanket consisting of a strange, dark substance crawled across the sky, swallowing not only the hidden sun but the emerging stars, the moon, and with it, the only remaining semblance of hope. All the while, the pain inside my head got stronger, until I could no longer fight it. I stopped crawling, letting my wound take its toll, once again bringing me to the realm of sleep. I'm not sure how much time passed between the beginning of the raid and my second awakening. Without a sun or a moon, there was really no way of telling. The darkness had effectively created a timeless void, one filled but with little more than terror and death. Yet I could still see an unexpected glimmer of hope, the dim outline of a light shining in the distance. Using what little remained of my strength, I got back on my feet, moving towards the light on shaky legs. For a while, I had wondered if I had been killed. I thought that the light might be my entrance into the afterlife, but as I got closer, that hope was brutally shattered. Down the road, I could recognize the outline of the gas station, illuminated by a car parked a few hundred yards further ahead. It essentially left me with two options: either run for the car and attempt a futile escape, or hide inside of the building. Considering my day's state, I opted for the latter, knowing that the predators would be quick to investigate the unexpected light source. Using the gas station's back doors, I could enter the building out of view of the lights. I was depending on the place being empty, hoping that the bright lights had attracted the predators away from my chosen hiding spot. Holding my breath, I turned the handle to open the door. It produced loud creaks as I pulled it, a sound that shattered the otherwise silent atmosphere. But before I could even get it halfway open, I felt something punch me in the chest, shoving me to the ground. Coughing for air, I could only stare up at my assailant, waiting for the next blow to tear through my flesh. But instead of more pain, I was greeted by a voice filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "Stay the hell down," a man whispered aggressively. In spite of the darkness, I could tell that he was a well-built man, most likely in his mid-40s. He had a revolver to my face, his hands trembling as he held the gun. I could tell that he was terrified, but I also knew that I wasn't the object of his fear. "Are you one of them?" he asked, a bit louder this time. Had he mistaken me for one of the predators, or was he blinded by the darkness and confused? Nevertheless, I was too frozen in fear to even form a coherent response. Only once he had asked me a second time did I find the words to beg for mercy. "Please, I just need a place to hide." The terror in my voice seemed to disarm him. He mumbled a couple of profanities under his breath before holstering his gun and grabbing my hand. He pulled me inside, carefully closing the door behind us. I let out a brief sigh of relief, confused but glad not to be alone. "Stay quiet," the man said, before leading us into a small office lit up by a dim lamp. Within it stood a terrified-looking woman holding tight onto a boy that couldn't have been older than 5. It was a family hiding in the gas station during the raid. Though I was thankful to have found other survivors, why hadn't they taken refuge within one of the shelters? "Roger, what's going on?" the woman asked with a jittery voice. Her son cried silently, deathly afraid, but equally exhausted. I'm figuring it out, just stay quiet, Roger mumbled in frustration. He ordered me to sit down, putting a firm hand on my shoulder, and then he bent down to my level, making sure that I noticed his hand resting on the gun. What's your name? He asked. David, I said. He inspected my face, almost as if expecting me to change shapes and attack him. Though predators could poorly mimic human speech, there was no way that he could have mistaken me for one of them. Only when he had noticed the blood dripping down my temple did he appear to calm down. You hurt? He asked, showing a bit more concern. I touched my wound, feeling it sting upon contact. I could tell that it wasn't serious, and though my mind still lingered in the haze of the crash, I felt mostly functional. I'm fine, I mumbled, just a bit frazzled. Did these things do this to you? He went on. No, I began, still trying to figure out what had led up to the accident. I was in a car crash. As I spoke these words, a faint memory flashed before my eyes. I remembered speeding towards an intersection that I had expected to be empty, only to get cut off by a group of trucks speeding down the road. Trying to avoid T-boning the trucks, I swerved off the road, landing in a ditch. But still, there were details missing. Why hadn't anyone stopped to help? Well, alright, David, do you have any idea what the hell is going on here? Roger asked. It was a peculiar question, not because I actually had the faintest idea what the predators were or why our town was cursed, but because of how honest the question was. The man before me, Roger, hadn't the faintest idea what was going on. He didn't even seem surprised by the monster's very existence. Only then did it hit me why they hadn't sought out safety in the shelters. You're not from around here? I asked in shock, knowing that no visitors had been allowed into town for over 10 years. He shook his head. No, we were heading to Arlington, but we got lost. I don't even know where we are. Silverwoods, I explained. Silverwoods? Roger asked. Never heard of it. His obliviousness was understandable, as our town hadn't been marked on any maps for decades, nor had it been open to the public since the Night of Reckoning 13 years ago. The roads had long since been blocked, which begged the question, how had they even gotten into town? I'm sorry, you never should have come here, I mumbled, feeling pity for the unaware family. Well, yeah, no shit, this place is a nightmare. We were driving down the road as those animals attacked us. They killed my brother. Roger said, his voice getting louder with each spoken word until he finally caught himself. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Listen, if you know what's going on, you better talk right now. Though I fully understood the gravity of the situation, I lacked the vocabulary to properly explain just how screwed we were. I hesitated, trying my best to find a reasonable explanation. Every year on the night of the 31st, I began, still not exactly sure what to say. Something happens to Silverwood. It's like the world falls away, collapsing into a dark abyss. The sky vanishes and these creatures, predators, emerge from the dark. People that hide in the bunkers are usually fine, but for the rest, people like us, they get taken. Taken? Roger asked to clarify. When the predators attack, they don't kill you. They just form deep wounds that refuse to bleed. No matter how much you suffer, no matter how much you beg for death, they won't let you go. The only way out is to cremate the bodies before they're used as spare parts for those monsters. We've tried to fight back, but our weapons barely do anything to them. The woman looked at me with terror in her eyes, begging for me to reveal that it had all been a cruel joke, but such a relief would never come. What do we do? She asked. There was no reasonable suggestion for me to give her. Hiding would be our best bet, but if our hiding place were to be discovered, we would have no choice but to run. What's your name? I asked her, just trying to bring a nominal amount of normalcy into the conversation. Cassandra, she said, and this is Derek, our son. She paused, looking at me with begging eyes. Can you help us? Any amount of hope that I could provide would be a thinly veiled lie. But when death was all but a certainty, false hope was all that I had to give. We'll hide here until sunrise. If we stay quiet, we might have a chance. She nodded in agreement, just slightly relieved by my hollow reassurance. My thoughts wandered to Roger's brother, who we thought was dead. Truth be told, I knew the man was stuck inside the car, suffering from wounds that should have been fatal. But as morbid as it might have been, his suffering could have been the only thing keeping the predators distracted from our presence within the gas station. "How many times have you been through this?" Cassandra asked, her voice still shaky. 13, I said without needing to think twice about it. 13? Why would you stay here? Why not just leave? She whispered in a hail of questions. It's not that simple, I simply stated, hoping that she wouldn't pry too deep. Roger sat by the wall, staring into the dark through a crack in the door with his hand on the revolver. I didn't even dare to tell him how inefficient it would be at keeping the predators at bay. Best case scenario, it could slow them down, but keeping that information from him just might have left him with the slightest sense of control in an otherwise hopeless world. About an hour passed as we sat in silence, none of us daring to speak a word, lest the predators find us. I counted the seconds, trying to calculate how long we would have to sit before being greeted by the first rays of morning light. But our bout of silence would be abruptly interrupted by the distinct sound of knocking, shocking us all back to attention. It was coming from the back door that I had used to sneak inside. 3 successive slow knocks, followed by a tiny voice calling out through the cold night. "Let me in, I'm scared," it said. "Did you hear that?" Cassandra asked. It sounded like a little girl, Roger said with panic in his voice. We didn't dare move, each of us wondering if we had imagined the whole thing. But that glimmer of hope was quickly shattered by another set of knocks, before the voice called out again. "I know you're in there. I want to come inside," she said, her voice young and innocent, yet without emotion or any soul. "Shit, there's a kid out there," Roger said, instinctively getting up to help the girl. I quickly jumped to my feet, grabbing onto Roger's arm to stop him. He stared back at me, his eyes filled with anger. I could only shake my head, no, to keep him from investigating the sound. "Don't," was all that I dared to mumble. As we stood there, another 3 knocks emitted from the door, and once again, the little girl called out for help. "Help me, I will die." Her voice cracked between each iteration, a poor copy of a child's voice. The creature clearly struggled to maintain the facade. Despite its initial display of innocence, that was no child. But for those unaware of the predator's capabilities, it could be enough to fool them. "Get your hands off me. I'm not letting a little girl stay out there to die," Roger growled as he pulled away from me. "It's not a damn child," I whispered loudly, grabbing onto his arm again. With that, he punched me in the face, causing me to tumble towards the wall. Before I could regain my balance, he grabbed my shirt, putting his gun to my face. "Touch me again, I dare you," Roger said. The others sat speechless on the floor. Derek wanted to cry from the commotion, but Cassandra kept him occupied. She could only stare helplessly at the unfolding situation with her mouth agape. And once again, 3 knocks were heard before the little girl called out for help, each time sounding slightly less human. "Listen to it, Roger, that's not a girl," I explained. "It's a predator. If you open that door, we're all dead." He stared at me in disbelief, and I couldn't blame him. He had most likely spent his whole life in relative safety, unaware of the true horrors hiding in the darkness. The mere existence of monsters challenged his understanding of the world, leaving him in a state of horrific realization and confusion. "Come on, Roger, you know that I'm telling the truth," I begged. "Do not do this." We waited for the same 3 knocks, followed by the broken voice begging for our attention. That time, Roger finally seemed to understand what was going on. He lowered the revolver, looking at me with pleading eyes as the truth finally dawned on him. At that moment, I was staring at a man on the brink of utter desperation. "What do we do about her?" he asked. "There's nothing that we can do. It's a mimic. They seek out survivors and alert the rest. If it's knocking on a door, it's just a matter of time before the rest come." "So we keep hiding," Cassandra chimed in. "No, it's too late for that. There's only one option left, and it's not a good one." "What?" Roger asked. "We have to run for our lives." "Do we exit through the front?" Roger asked. "No, we'll be in direct view of the light," I explained. "We take the back door. The mimics aren't as dangerous. They just alert the others, but we have to be quick." We exited the office, moving towards the back doors with a hint of hesitation. The mimic was most certainly expecting our presence, but if we were lucky, we could surprise it. "Is your car still working?" I asked. Roger glanced in the direction of the front windows, the lights still casting shadows inside of the gas station. While the battery hadn't yet given in, the car might have been damaged during the attack. "It should be working, but," he began. "But what?" "Oliver's still inside," he mumbled. It took me a while to figure out that he was talking about his brother. He hadn't mentioned him by name up until that point, which had helped me dehumanize him and the horrors that he must have gone through. Though I had often heard stories about the Predator's victims, I had never once seen them up close. "You said that he was killed," I asked. "Did they leave him in the car?" Roger nodded. Though I knew what we were about to face, I kept my mouth shut. My brief explanation earlier still didn't seem to have hit them, but if the predators really had gotten him, I knew that he would still be alive, despite all evidence pointing to the contrary. It's the only shot that we have. They all realized taking the car was the best option, but seeing the mangled remains of someone they loved was enough to break anyone. To spare them the sight, I offered to go first. Roger handed me the weapon and we gathered up by the back door. Once again, the mimic knocked 3 times before calling out to help, but that time we would answer the call. I kicked the door open, which shoved the mimic back slightly. At a first glance, it looked like a hooded girl, short and skinny, but as it stumbled back, its face was revealed. In place of eyes, a nose, and mouth, it only had a gaping hole with a tendril resembling a tongue. I didn't even attempt to shoot it, knowing that the sound would only attract the predators faster. "Run!" I yelled, sprinting past the mimic before it could even regain its footing. We rushed for the car, making sure to stay in the ditch by the road, hidden from the car's headlights. On the side of the road, we could see the first predators heading to the mimic's location. Unlike the mimic, they didn't make any attempt at copying the human form, instead using various body parts to extend their own twisted figures. Luckily, they didn't see us, too preoccupied to search in the dark. But once we got halfway to the car, we heard another horrific sound to penetrate the silent atmosphere. "Help me," a guttural, agonized voice called from the car. Roger and his family stopped dead in their tracks, horrified by Oliver's voice begging for their assistance. No, I saw him die," Cassandra let out in shock. "They tore his chest open." "I told you they don't let their victims die," I explained bluntly. "Please, I don't want to die," Oliver called out again. "How is it possible?" Roger asked in disbelief. His pleas for help disturbed me too, but we were running out of time. I had to take action, even if it meant traumatizing the survivors. Though I wasn't sure whether or not it would work, I knew exactly what I had to do. "Stay back," I said. "You don't have to see this." "What are you doing?" Cassandra asked. I left the ditch, walking quickly towards the parked car. Roger and Cassandra remained by Derek's side, confused by my actions but following my instructions. "It hurts," Oliver cried from the car. He sat in the front passenger seat, unmoving but clearly in agony. He groaned, desperately calling out for help that would not come. I walked over to his side, finally getting a view of the man who had allegedly died in his seat. What I saw shattered something primal inside me, tearing away the weak facade of bravery that I had mustered. His chest and abdomen had been torn apart, and most of his organs were missing, leaving only parts of his lungs and his heart back. An arm and both of his legs were gone, leaving him unable to even attempt to fight back. The predators had been gathering spare parts before the mimic called them away, leaving him with the only thing they didn't care to consume, his head. Despite his mortal wounds, he was unable to die, aware and awake enough to suffer. "Help me," he begged as he saw me. Not a drop of blood was anywhere to be seen, trapped within both of them missing and remaining chunks of organs. His only way out of misery would be cremation, but it was something that I couldn't provide. "It hurts so much. Do something." "Don't worry, it's all gonna be over soon," I said as reassuring as I could. That was the moment he realized just how broken he was. He knew that, and relief could only come through death, but even death was a mercy that I couldn't grant him. Still, he had hopes for it, seeing the gun in my hand and all. Acceptance filled his eyes as I raised the revolver. I could only pray that my actions would give him the slightest hint of relief. I pulled the trigger without a moment's hesitation. It was the least that I could do for a fellow human. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the air. If the predators didn't know of our presence before that point, they sure did now. Without wasting time, I pulled the broken body out from the car and tossed it unceremoniously onto the ground. His muscles still twitched, but I hoped the damage to his brain was enough to render him unconscious, even if he was still technically alive. "Let's go," I ordered. Roger ran to my side and I saw the fear in his eyes, but as soon as he saw the state of Oliver's body, I knew that he understood. "Don't come here, Cassandra. Put Derek in the car," he demanded before turning to me. He wanted to speak, but there were no words that could explain the act that I had just committed. Instead, he just took the gun back and sat himself in the passenger seat, letting me drive. As I sat myself in the driver's seat, I had another brief moment of lucidity. A few memories flashed back to me, the setting sun, the convoy of trucks speeding down the road. They had been military vehicles carrying troops and weapons towards the town. It was an odd sight considering the fact that our town didn't possess a military base, but the way that they were driving, neglecting to check on me after the crash, they were there for a reason, one outweighing the risk of collateral damage. "What are you waiting for?" Cassandra asked. "Drive, they're coming." I shook myself back to attention, giving our rear a quick glance. Dozens of the predators were rushing down the road, finally awake of our presence. I hit the gas, just barely gaining enough speed to escape their clutches. We had made it, if only for the time being. We were on the outskirts of town with the nearest shelter 5 miles away, but to risk entering the center during a raid was a foolish idea. Instead, I tried to rack my mind for alternative hiding spots. Only one came to mind though, the bunkers of a nearby wealthy district. "David," Roger said after we had been driving in silence for a few minutes. "Yeah, I appreciate what you did for my brother back there, but I can't bring myself to thank you." I glanced over to him, seeing tears in his eyes. He didn't dare look at me. I couldn't blame the man. Shooting a family member in the head isn't something that one usually appreciates, but considering the circumstances, it was the best relief that I could have given him. "Where are we going anyway?" he asked. "There's a residential neighborhood just a few miles down the road. If we're lucky, one of the rich guys living there has a bunker that we can use. I just hope that they open up," I explained. On the way, we drove past the vast forests of Silverwoods, seeing the occasional tall figure among the trees. Those weren't the predators that we were hiding from, but something else entirely, something that even I didn't have a name for. And then we came upon a T-junction in the road, one marked with a simple sign pointing in both directions. To the right, we had the city center leading past the many residential neighborhoods that we sought after, but the other led to the fortune fields. "What's to the left?" Cassandra asked, noticing the road leading into the forest. "Fortune fields," I said coldly. "We don't go there anymore." "Why not?" she asked. "It's better if you don't know. We're turning right anyway." They didn't push for more answers, already overwhelmed by the horrors that we collectively experienced so far. We just continued down the road in silence, heading to the nearest possible site of refuge. Calvin Place was the name that we were looking for, a small commune populated by the wealthiest people of Silverwood. It would be the best place to look for raid bunkers. How else to display one's wealth in such a hopeless society? On the way, we came across several of the military brake trucks that I had seen in the convoy, all of them unmarked. Their presence was enough to clarify the memories of my crash, confirming that the military had started operations in our town. But if the truck was here, where were the men that it carried? Nevertheless, we weren't about to stop to investigate. We just kept on driving until finding the sign that read Calvin Place. "Yep, this should be it," I muttered as I turned onto the street. Our headlights flowed down the neighborhood, illuminating another heap of stranded vehicles on the side of the road. "What's the military doing here?" Roger asked, almost relieved. "No idea, but I have a feeling that they're not here to help us," I said. I slowed the vehicle down, peering down each side of the road for a visible bunker. The lack of predators surprised me, but with all the possible victims gone, it was possible that they had moved on towards the town center. "Hey, I see something," Cassandra announced, pointing to a concrete structure between two of the houses. It was one of the bunkers slanting into the ground. For a brief moment, I thought that we had found possible salvation, but the hope was quickly stripped away as I had noticed the doors. They had been torn apart from the outside, as if the predators had simply dug through them. "They're dead," I let out in a shocked gasp. "How?" Through 13 years of raids, not once had there been a report of a broken shelter or a bunker. Something this year had changed, correlation only to the presence of the US military. "Did they do this?" Roger asked. Ignoring his question, I put my car back in gear. I knew that there would be more bunkers hidden in the area, and I could only pray that they were intact. We kept driving down the neighborhood, scouring it for any place to hide. We found 2 more bunkers, each more broken than the last. I was about to give up and stop the car and suggest that we just hide within one of the houses, but that wasn't an option. And then I saw it. The sole intact bunker of Calvin Place, standing unscathed in an otherwise hopeless world. I hit the brakes hard, causing Roger to fly forward in his seat. But it didn't matter, we had found a solace. "That's it, the bunker?" Cassandra asked. A sickly growl shattered the silent neighborhood, one akin to a human-like animalistic shriek of pain. They must have heard our car and they're on their way to investigate a fresh source of flesh. "We better hurry," I said as I rushed over to the bunker, not hesitating to knock hard on the metal doors. "Hey, is anybody in there?" I shouted. I knew the excessive noise would only serve to attract more of these monstrosities, but I had no other choice. "Please, we need help." I kept knocking, praying the people inside didn't mistake us for mimics. There was no real locking mechanism on the exterior, meaning that somebody had to be inside. They refused to respond to our pleas, all the while allowing the predators to get closer. "Come on, let us in." Roger joined in as well, kicking and hammering on the doors. And then we heard a distinct clunk coming from the inside. We took a couple of steps back, wondering if we had both heard the same thing. Roger raised his revolver as a precaution, not sure whether we would be greeted by our saviors or something else entirely. A few seconds passed before the door finally shot open at impressive speeds. 2 soldiers stepped out with their rifles raised, both equipped in advanced gas masks. Neither spoke a single word. They just menacingly kept their rifles pointed at us, expecting us to understand what they had wanted. Roger threw his hands up in panic, knowing that we stood no chance at taking them both out. Only once they saw Cassandra carrying Derek did they gesture for all of us to rush inside, still not speaking a word. They locked the door shut behind us, still keeping an eye on Roger and me. Only then did one of them decide to talk. "Names?" he simply asked. The shock had rendered us speechless, which only prompted the soldier to yell out his order even louder. "Names!" "I'm David Wilson. We're just looking for a place to..." No sooner had I spoken my name before the soldier redirected his attention to Roger and his family, ignoring any sort of explanation that I could offer. He repeated his question once more, to which Roger listed each of their names. It seemed to put the soldiers at ease, but they still seemed to be on alert. They both had names on their uniforms, Avery and Perez. "Are they on the list?" Avery asked. Perez pulled out a small device, typing in a few words before responding. "He is," he said, pointing to me, "but they are not." The response riled them up again, raising their rifles but only pointing them at Roger and Cassandra. Whoa, what are you doing?" Roger asked in shock, placing himself between his family and the soldiers. "Identification," Avery ordered. "Now." With a trembling hand, Roger pulled out a worn-out driver's license and handed it to Avery, who attempted to compare the ancient picture of a much younger Roger. He looked back and forth a few times before finally confirming that he was in fact who he claimed to be. "All right," Avery sighed. "Let's go. You might have made it this far, but I can promise you this night ain't over yet." None of us knew what to ask, nor how to respond. We just stood there with a dumb look on our faces, awaiting further orders. "It's time to get you underground." Perez joined in before forcing us deeper into the bunker. Cold water dropped down onto my neck from a broken pipe on the ceiling. The bunker hallway was narrow, digging much further into the ground than I could have anticipated. Along the way, it was illuminated by dim fluorescent bulbs that flickered as we passed, just barely enough to light up the path before us. Neither of the 2 soldiers spoke a word as they led us underground, instead making sure that we didn't make any quick, unexpected movements. Though it felt better being surrounded by armed men, the anonymity caused by their gas masks didn't exactly instill any sense of confidence. Still, anything beat dealing with the horrors lurking in the darkness above ground. "Why are you wearing masks?" Roger asked, a question that was promptly ignored. "Where are you taking us?" Cassandra chimed in, garnering no response. It took about 2 minutes of navigating the narrow corridors before we finally arrived at an opening. We entered a larger room at the bottom of the bunker, one with another sealed door at its end. 3 soldiers occupied the space, one of them lying in the corner with his guts torn apart. One of them attempted to tend to his wounds, but he seemed more perplexed by the lack of blood than anything. "Where the hell did you find civilians?" one of them asked. His name read Dawson. "What's going on here?" Cassandra asked. "Are you going to hurt us?" "We just saved your life, didn't we?" Perez responded, seemingly annoyed. The 2 of them removed their masks, revealing 2 young men, barely in their 20s. A third joined us, Petrosa. He was older than the rest, a battered, middle-aged man with several scars running down his face. He didn't look worried like the rest, showing no signs of fear. Instead, he just appeared to be tired. "How did you make it here?" he asked. "Luck," was all that I could think to say. "We took a car and just drove. I saw your convoy. Where are the rest of you?" "Well, they found us," Petrosa responded. "We're all that's left. I hope to God the other groups fared better." "The rest are," I began. Dead, he finished. We didn't stand a chance. Our weapons barely fazed them. We tried burning them, but there's just too many. He turned his attention to the wounded man on the ground, lying with his intestines exposed. Death would be his only relief, but it was a gift that he would never receive. What are you doing here? I kept on asking. He hesitated. It was obviously information that he wasn't allowed to disclose. That much was obvious. Yet there was no chain of command remaining to punish him for breaking the rules. I shouldn't tell you, but seeing as we're all about to die anyway, you might as well die well educated. Once again he paused, checking the state of his men before continuing. It took our team years to find a way into town. Seeing as anyone that crosses the border to Silverwood never seems to return. We figured you were a lost cause, a glitch in our reality. We knew that there were otherworldly beings here. We just had no means of accessing them. Well, that was until last year when we found one of these things wandering around Arlington. It took a whole platoon just to destroy the thing. He was interrupted by a loud clunk that echoed throughout the bunker. Ah, shit, he let out. All right, time to get our asses out of here. They found us? Cassandra half-asked, half-stated. Her question was quickly answered by another bang shooting through the bunker. This tunnel leads to an underground network of caves. It's where these things come from, Petrosa explained. There are 4 entry points and we sent a platoon to each of them. We better pray the rest of them had more luck than us. As he explained the situation, the predators were banging on the doors slowly, but certainly digging their way through the metal doors. Perez and Avery pulled a set of secondary doors open, revealing a wide tunnel expanding endlessly far ahead. What about Kaplan? Perez asked, gesturing to the wounded soldier. Carry him, Petrosa ordered. Oh, screw that, Kaplan moaned. I'm already dead, just go. Perez tried to argue, but he was quickly interrupted by the distinct sound of metal being forcefully bent. They were seconds away from getting through, leaving us with no chance of transporting a heavily injured man. Hey Petrosa, leave me one of your grenades for those things, what do you say? Petrosa and Avery handed Kaplan a couple of grenades, mumbling some words of comfort to him before gathering at the door. Time to go, Petrosa ordered, but he was too late. The outer doors had blown open and within seconds, the first predators had reached us. Their spindly, twisted bodies pulled themselves along the ground at impressive speeds, quickly reaching their first victim. Perez screamed in agony as they dug into his leg, tearing him apart instantly. Avery and Petrosa tried to save him, but it was no use. They were forced into the tunnel with the rest of us, trying to keep the monsters at bay with a hail of suppressive fire. Screw you, we heard Kaplan yell, followed quickly by a massive explosion that reverberated through the tunnel. It was enough to tear the predators to shreds, but their vile bodies still kept moving, refusing to die. If nothing else, at least he had bought us a couple of minutes before they had regrouped. Only the 6 of us even made it into the tunnel, desperately fleeing from an enemy that refused to die, leaving only 2 soldiers with actual combat experience, Petrosa and Avery. Keep moving, Petrosa ordered, pushing us further down the narrow corridor leading deeper into the ground below. The metal doors behind us had essentially fused shut from the blast within. While it would hinder the predators for a while, it couldn't keep them locked inside forever. The air grew heavy as we proceeded, with the temperature rising the further that we descended down the sloping tunnel. Sweat poured down my back, mixing with blood seeping from wounds that I hadn't yet discovered. I had been hit by shrapnel during the blast, and while it had only dug superficially into my flesh, it still hurt like hell. I don't think this is the way out, Roger said with worry in his voice. It will lead to a central hub. We can leave through the additional access tunnels from there, Avery shouted back. With my hearing damaged from the explosion, I could barely recognize their voices over the incessant ringing in my ears. I could tell that the others were struggling too, based on them screaming despite being no more than 5 feet away from each other. "I see something," Cassandra called out, pointing down the tunnel. Sure enough, at the very end of our path lay an opening in the wall. Though it wouldn't lead us to freedom, it at least seemed to enter into a larger room. "Yeah, we're almost there," Roger announced. But our rush for the opening was quickly halted to the sound of multiple gunshots echoing throughout the tunnel. It appeared the other platoons had indeed made it to their target, but they weren't there alone. "Are they some of your soldiers?" I asked them. We'll find out soon enough. Stay behind me," Petrosa said as he raised his rifle. He took the lead alongside Avery, moving swiftly but carefully towards the sound of the fighting. The closer that we got, the more the sound of gunshots gave way to men screaming for their lives. It was a battle I knew that they couldn't win, yet they fought on to their last breaths. Petrosa signaled for us to stop, letting Avery get a peek into the opening. He took careful steps forward, ready to stick his head around the corner. But as soon as he even attempted to get a glimpse, he was forced back by a storm of fire that raged past the exit. He covered his eyes as they burned from the intense heat, groaning in pain. The burns were only superficial, leaving behind little more than a missing eyebrow. "Hold your fire, we're friendly," he screamed. And with that, the fire stopped, pummeling the room into an eerie silence. Avery and Petrosa moved out from the tunnel, securing the area ahead. The rest of us followed closely behind. The tunnel ended in a massive chamber connected to various cave systems, extending endlessly far down into the ground below. All we could see at its end was a pitch-black void emitting distant humanoid screams. Our only footing was a set of rusty scaffolds extending all the way around the room, extending into several flimsy rooms and platforms hanging above the whole. 4 exits were marked A to D. We had just entered through the latter. A man wielding a flamethrower stood on one of the extension platforms below us, the sole survivor of the battle. Chunks of his body had been torn out by the predators, guts and all refusing to bleed. The wounds were definitely incompatible with life, but his body was too pumped full of adrenaline for the man to realize that he was supposed to be dead. "It's all right, we've got you," Petrosa said, carefully disarming the man, who promptly fell into his arms from pure exhaustion. "I have to burn them," he mumbled, barely audible. "I have to burn them. Help me burn them." There were several charred bodies on the platform next to him, each a prior member of his squad. The fire had been a mercy for them, preventing their bodies from being consumed by the predators. Petrosa assessed the wounds, immediately recognizing their severity. "Hey, it's gonna be all right, just relax," he said with a fake sense of comfort. "We failed," the man said. "We couldn't end it. They came from the hole, they tore them apart. I couldn't stop them. We're here now. You don't have to fight anymore," Petrosa went on. With that, Petrosa pulled his sidearm from its holster, swiftly pointing it to the man's head before pulling the trigger. The rest of us could only stare in shock, surprised, but relieved that we no longer had to witness his suffering. "He doesn't need to feel the flames," Petrosa explained as he armed himself with the flamethrower. He took a step back from the mangled corpse before unleashing a hellstorm of flames upon his body. Within seconds, it turned into an unrecognizable charred mess. Only then did I realize that nobody had even bothered to get his name before sending him to the afterlife. But we were not given time to process his death before being interrupted by the sound of shattering metal in the distance. It was coming from Tunnel D, all the way back at the bunker at the end. The creatures had broken through the door, which meant that they would be all over us within minutes. "All right, let's get to work. It's time to end this nightmare," Petrosa said. There were several explosive charges attached to various load-bearing points around the chamber. They had presumably been planted by the squad who had perished, though they hadn't lived long enough to complete the job. But why they so desperately wanted to blow the chamber up was a question that remained unanswered. Who the hell built this place? I asked, amazed by the scale of it. The hole in the center was by no means a natural formation, which meant that someone had built it. They're called Artifacts Industries, a secret organization working in the shadows. They started digging out the caves beneath your town 15 years ago. Petrosa explained. Why? I asked. Hell if I know. But what they found was more than even they could handle. Because of them, thousands of people have died. Growls could be heard in the distance. We were running out of time. We gotta hurry, Petrosa began. Avery, take David and finish setting up the charges. I'll try to seal the tunnel with suppressive fire. I might buy you some time. What about me? Roger asked. You know how to use one of these? He asked. Roger nodded. Then bring your family out of here. Do whatever it takes. Go. He grabbed the rifle, walked over to me, and gave me a quick hug. It was an unexpected but pleasant surprise. After all, we had been through a lifetime in the span of 6 hours. Good luck, he said, before leaving me alone with the last 2 soldiers alive in Silverwoods. Petrosa placed himself at Tunnel D, flamethrower in hand. Here they come, he yelled. Though I had no experience with explosives, it was easy enough to follow Avery's instructions. He dealt with the charges themselves while I ran cables through the various loads. Petrosa stood by the tunnel ready to fire as soon as the predators arrived. Burn! He screamed before letting out a storm of smoldering fire. The monsters screeched in pain, almost surprised to encounter any form of meaningful resistance. It wasn't the first time that fire had been used against them, but what our town could produce on its own had nothing on military-grade flamethrowers. How much time do you need? Petrosa asked. I can't hold them for long. 5 minutes, Avery shouted back. The idea was to collapse the cave in on itself, making sure the creatures remained trapped in their void for the rest of eternity. It was a foolish plan, but it was the only one that we had. A few of the predators managed to break through Petrosa's storm, their bodies burning as they tried to attack us. Even then, they attempted their best to mimic human speech, a futile attempt at tricking us, but disturbing nonetheless. Avery turned his attention towards them for just a second, firing off a few rounds into their limbs. While it wouldn't stop them, the force was enough for them to stumble and fall into the deep abyss below. How much ammo do you have left? I asked. Not enough, Petrosa responded. I finished attaching the last cable as Avery tried to figure out the remote detonation. It could be set up using a radio, but the configuration itself was a mess. Shit, Avery let out in frustration. What's wrong? I asked. It's not working. I have to set them off manually, he shot back. You done with the cables? I nodded. Well then get the hell out of here, he demanded. I can't leave you, I argued. That wasn't a suggestion. Take a weapon and get the hell out of here or I'll shoot you myself. You don't have to die today. I looked back at Petrosa, who was moments away from running out of gas. He had switched back to his rifle, only using the flamethrower when absolutely needed. Go, Avery demanded again. With a heavy heart, I followed the order given. I picked up a weapon and I headed for Tunnel C. Unlike the one that we had entered through, it was a refined, spacious hallway with several side junctions leading to different sections of the cavernous system. Each was marked for a different purpose, such as sleeping quarters, a cafeteria, and laboratories. The walls, though clearly durable, had all suffered scorch marks, with piles of charred bodies on the ground. In the distance, I could hear the 2 soldiers shouting orders at each other, screaming profanities between intermittent gunfire. The hallway stretched on for about a mile before I again stumbled upon a pile of charred corpses, each lying next to weapons strewn across the ground. I picked up a shotgun, putting my inefficient pistol on my belt for emergencies. Soft growls could be heard from the end of the tunnel that I traversed, meaning that I had no way of exiting the facility without a fight. I proceeded carefully, holding onto the shotgun with trembling hands as I approached the exit. The tunnel ended in another bunker connected to the surface. It was identical to the one that we had entered through, spacious and well lit up in comparison to the hallway. There was a mangled, unrecognizable body lying on the floor in the middle, letting out pathetic whimpers that just barely resembled human speech. I let out a sigh of morbid relief, thinking that I might be able to pass it without being attacked. I lowered my weapon, ready to sprint past it and finally reach the exit. But before I could enter the room, I felt a hand cover my mouth, violently pulling me into a side passage away from the bunker. "Shh," a voice said, one that I immediately recognized as Roger's. I turned around to be met by a morbid sight. Roger had been gutted and torn to shreds by the predators. It was a miracle that he could even remain standing. Derek lay on the ground next to him, unconscious with a severe head wound, but otherwise unscathed. "Roger, oh God," was all that I could let out. They got me good, but I couldn't save her." Tears filled his eyes as I realized that his wife was missing. "Cassandra, is she?" I began. He just looked at the mangled body on the ground outside, too damaged for me to recognize. A creature walked up to her, tearing bits and pieces off to use for its own body. Another couple joined in, at which point I accepted that there was no way for us to pass unnoticed. We had lost. I collapsed down next to Roger, not daring to look at his mortal wounds. I contemplated just going for it, firing as many shells into the monstrosities as I could, before finally getting slaughtered myself. It beat going out without a fight, but it wouldn't make a difference. "I'm sorry," I said. "I actually thought that we stood a chance." "It's not your fault," Roger said back. "But David..." "What?" "I need you to do something for me." I just stared at him in silence. A part of me knew exactly what he was about to ask, but I wasn't ready to accept it. "I don't want them to get my son. I can't let him turn into one of those things. You have to." His voice trailed off. "Roger, I began before being interrupted by a massive boom reverberating from the distance. A shock wave shortly followed, finally ending in a mild earthquake. Another explosion followed, and then a third and a fourth. All 8 charges were detonated in succession. Avery and Petrosa had done it. The sound seemed to anger the predators inside the bunker, stealing their attention away from their meal. They rushed blindly towards the source of the sound, running past us without even noticing. The ground beneath kept shaking, forming cracks in the corridor's facade. Small rocks fell from the ceiling, followed by large chunks of debris. Without hesitating any further, I decided to take the chance to escape. I pulled Roger up with me, who was able to remain standing despite his wounds. He carried Derek in his arms, allowing me to take the lead into the bunker. "Let's hurry," I yelled as the cracks around us grew larger, allowing progressively bigger chunks to rain down upon us. Roger groaned in agony but refused to give up until he had brought his son to safety. We sprinted past Cassandra's dead body, not having the equipment nor time to burn it. I just prayed her mind was too far gone to feel the pain. With each passing second, the caves were collapsing in on themselves. We would have less than a minute to reach the surface, lest we get trapped in the rubble. In the distance, we could hear the predators scream in a mixture of pain and frustration. They had lost the battle and they knew it. "There's the exit," I yelled. With the frame partially collapsed, it took our combined force just to push the doors open. A gust of fresh air greeted us as we stumbled into the dark, cold night just in time for the ceiling to break. The entire facility collapsed, trapping any unfortunate soul still stuck inside. I fell to the ground in pure exhaustion, relieved, but in pain from the various wounds that I had sustained during the fight. Roger remained standing, knowing that once he sat himself down, he would never get back up again. I just carefully placed Derek on the soft ground below, finally taking the chance to inspect his own wounds. "Where are we?" he asked without showing any concern for his own well-being. "I'm not entirely sure," I responded. "Somewhere in the forest." We had exited into a large opening in the woods, a perfect circle with a clear view up into the pitch-black sky above. Even then, there were no stars or moon to greet us, just the same old void that marked death for us all. Seeing it again filled my body with an undeniable sense of dread. If the explosion had worked, why was the sky still missing? It didn't work. I let out in defeat. Creatures growled in the distance, emitting their sickly, twisted calls for blood. The explosion alone would have been enough to alert anything within a 5-mile radius, which meant that they would all be heading straight for us. "We have to keep moving." I tried to let out, unable to get up due to the residual earthquakes. Silhouettes formed at the tree line, not hesitating before pouncing at us. I tried to get up and run, but it just slammed me in the chest, sending me flying into the ground. I felt my leg break and something dug its way into my torso. I tried to keep crawling, but the pain had rendered me paralyzed. Roger wasn't even attempting to fight back. He just laid his own body over Derek, hoping to shield him from any incoming attacks. One by one, creatures joined in, surrounding us on all sides. I pulled the pistol from my belt, ready to fight, but there were too many. Even if the weapon proved effective, I didn't have enough ammo to kill them all. It was over. Hoping for a quick way out, I lied back down, catching my breath for the last time before departing from our world. There was no way that I would let them catch me alive. I pressed the cold metal against my temple, holding my breath as I got a last glimpse of the world. The ground beneath me shook one last time, creating several gaps in the foundation. I slid into one of them, almost losing the grip that I had on my gun. And then the shaking stopped and the world fell silent. Without further distractions, I firmly gripped my pistol, pointing it back at my head as I stared up into the sky for one last time. The stars and moon shined brilliantly above, casting dim light across the forest. I prepared to pull the trigger, only moments away from death before it dawned on me. The sky was normal. I looked around, being met by little more than an empty forest. The creatures were gone, erased from the world despite the absence of daylight. The cave had collapsed, severing the link between our world and theirs. We were safe. "We made it," I gasped, tossing away the gun that had come a second away from ending my life. "Roger, we made..." But my words were cut off as I laid eyes upon his body. He had succumbed to his wounds as soon as the creatures had died. With no unnatural powers left to force him alive, he had departed our world alongside the monsters of the night. Derek lay beside him, still unconscious, but very much breathing. I checked my own wounds, which had started bleeding heavily. With the adrenaline fading from my system, I could feel myself slip into another forced slumber. Too weak and exhausted to fight back, I passed out, the world turning dark before my eyes. A week would pass before I awoke in the town hospital. The injuries that I had sustained were slightly worse than I had anticipated, landing me in a coma. If it hadn't been for the rescue workers investigating the explosion, we never would have been found. Derek had woken up a few days earlier. He had suffered a mild brain hemorrhage but wouldn't experience any permanent brain injury. Thanks to the bravery of his parents, he would live to see another day. Being in the vicinity of the unknown underground facility, I was questioned by both local police and state agents. I tried my best to explain the course of events that had occurred, but I was drowning in questions myself. In the end, there was nothing that they could do to investigate, as all the evidence lay buried in a rubble underground, one keeping horrors beyond our collective comprehension at bay. I just pray that it's enough to keep us safe for the coming year, because if it isn't, they'll surely be back for revenge.
Damon McCory. Rain. Big Country Allen.